I have a fantastic plan for Friday. The whole day, post High Holy Days, pretty much gonna relax on the couch, hang out with my newborn son, and probably switch between the Food Network and HGTV over and over and over again, switching between the two. As my fellow HGTV fans know, seemingly every house nowadays is currently furnished as either farmhouse chic, whatever that is, or mid-century modern. It feels like the world is obsessed with mid-century modern. Even a New York Times book review said, "There's no denying that the 50s are back in vogue again." As we know from the book of Ecclesiastes, there is nothing new under the sun. And mid-century modern furniture fits squarely in that description. If you've escaped the home design show frenzy, just know that mid-century modern design is typically characterized by clean, simple lines, honest use of materials, and does not generally include decorative embellishments, and it's having quite a revival right now. From the 30s to the 60s, it prized function over form. And the way it worked was more important than how it looked. It grew in America based on earlier styles like the Bauhaus movement. And if you've ever been to Tel Aviv, you know that style well, because Tel Aviv boasts more Bauhaus buildings than any other city in the world. In an article in The Atlantic entitled, "How Jews Designed the Modern American Home," Stephen Heller writes that not every mid-century modern designer was Jewish, but an awful lot of them were. Immigrant and second-generation Jews helped to shape the epoch-defining, less is more Bauhaus-inspired aesthetic that is a pervasive presence in many American homes and businesses, especially back then during the post-war period. Now, as we turn those round Honeywell classic thermometers on the wall, or relax in an Eames chair, or sit in just about anything by Herman Miller, whose primary designer was George Nelson, we think of these Jewish designers who made up the core of this mid-century modern design. Now, why am I talking about this? Well, this aesthetic, made to be functional for human beings, taking up just the amount of space that is necessary, no more, no less. It was made to make people's lives easier, but not overpower the space. This human-first design, taking account of the world around it, how it's used and how it flows with the rest of the room. Well, this intentional design deeply reminds me of Reform Judaism. Reform Judaism at its core is about this intentionality in design, designing our lives and our Judaism. Reform Judaism, too, was curated to take account of the world around it, to intentionally work with the greater culture, and to take account of the full human being. I had the pleasure for this past year and a half, we all, the clergy, had the pleasure of engaging with a group of congregants. Everyone was invited to gather every weekday on Zoom to study. One of the topics that I and so many others studied was peeling back the many layers of the platforms of Reform Judaism. Beginning in 1885 in Pittsburgh, and then 4 more years later, Reform Jewish leaders gathered to capture the state of Reform Jewish thought by composing these platforms. Before that, there had been a number of conferences in Germany throughout the 1800s. But by 1885, Reform Judaism was flourishing in America, and they gathered in Pittsburgh to pick up that mantle of Reform Judaism, to document what Reform Judaism looked like and their goals for it. And in this, they wrote down that, and they dismissed the laws that are, quote, apt rather to obstruct than to further spiritual elevation, and accept only as binding moral laws and maintain only as such the ceremonies that elevate and sanctify our lives, rejecting all that are not adapted to the views of modern civilization. There was a lot, so I want to repeat a specific part there. Accept as binding only the moral laws and the ceremonies that elevate or sanctify our lives. As I hope you can tell, Reform Judaism, both here and in Israel, is deeply unlike what it was in 1885. In an essence, they kind of threw out the baby with the bathwater, dismissing any laws about keeping kosher, about dress, be it a kippah, a talit, or any type of Torah-obligated dress. And they got rid of most of the laws from Torah, claiming that they were created for a very specific time and a very specific place, not ours. But one of the most interesting positions of those original reformers of Judaism was that they adamantly believed that they were living the most authentic form of Judaism. A Judaism that continued to evolve through time. They recognized that Judaism, many times throughout time, had reformed, if you will. It reformed after settling in Israel. It reformed after the destructions of the first and second temples. It reformed in the diaspora that followed, and even in the post-Talmudic era. Judaism had often changed and adapted. And so, those reformers of the 1800s believed that this will to adapt was the most authentic expression of Judaism. And this worked really well for Reform Judaism until maybe the mid-1900s. As Rabbi Dr. Aaron Pankin, Zichrono Livracha, wrote, the centripetal forces that had kept us close together here in America began to weaken, and the centrifugal forces came into play. American Jews were now free to branch out in the middle of the 1900s, living wherever they chose, taking up any profession, joining different political parties, participating in almost any club, rising to positions of prominence, and making choices in marriage and religious practice. Judaism began to be saturated with as many choices as there are milk options in the dairy aisle today. With so many choices of how, where, when, and even why to do Judaism, many became paralyzed with the overwhelming decision. In response, a kind of new catchphrase arrived on the lips of Reformed Jewish leaders: choice through knowledge. The idea was that when someone found themselves with the question of how to live or act or engage with Judaism, they ideally would make a thoughtful, authentic, educated decision. The problem was, there's no Yelp, there's no Wirecutter, there's no way to parse reviews on how to do my own personal Judaism. The onus is completely on the individual, of course supported by their community, but often when left to explore the supermarket aisles of Jewish choices, many left exhausted by the exercise. Rabbi Pankin continued, We in the Reform movement, we have the choice part covered. But on the knowledge part of the equation, we can certainly do better. We are a movement that values and respects individual choice, that puts Jewish ethics into action in laudable and moving ways, and often speaks lovingly of Jewish tradition. But we could also use some help in ensuring that our people understand and enact their ancestors' faith in deep ways. Our cherished Reformed Jewish tradition can inform both life's high points and its lows. It can call us to be better citizens of the world. It can respond to our need for spirituality and comfort and intellectual stimulation and our need for community. It can offer guidance for so many in those ethical and those practical decisions that we face every day. But it can't really offer any of this if we are too distracted to learn, to gain the knowledge, to make those meaningful, intentional decisions. So I have a challenge for you. In this year of 5782, my challenge is for you to try to be really reform. Now I know the context that you've probably heard the words really reform. Maybe you met someone and asked, where do you go to synagogue? And you're met with the answer, no, I'm not a member anywhere. I'm really reform. Or when you ask how their Shabbat was, and they say, no, I went out with friends. You see, I'm really reform. Oh, do you by any chance keep kosher? Do I have to take any dietary restrictions in mind? No. I'm really reform. And if you're on the clergy, I know, I've been asked a couple times, I'd like to have a wedding, but I want it to be, you guessed it, really reform. What is the deal with this phrase? If someone is really liberal, really conservative, it means they hold deep the platforms of those ends of the political spectrum. If someone's really active or really happy, really into watching The Bachelor, we know they, for a lack of better term, are really into those things. So why? Why does the really in front of reform seek to lessen our Judaism rather than emphasize it? Why are we inherently saying that we're not so proud of our expression of Judaism? I worry that we've shifted away from believing that what we do as Reformed Jews is authentic, because it truly is. Reformed Judaism is absolutely as authentic as all other streams of Judaism, from the most ultra-Orthodox to renewal to humanistic. And well, the leaders of the Reform movement of the 1800s, they believed it was even more authentic. We should be proud of the Judaism that brings intention and meaning and spirituality to our lives. When we make those meaningful, thoughtful choices informed by knowledge, we are living up to the ideals of Reformed Judaism. And with that, we could retake the phrase, really reform. And see, maybe someone asks you, regardless of your gender, do you wear a kippah every day? What if the response was, I do not. But let me tell you why. I don't, because you see, I spent a year and a half wearing a kippah everywhere I went. I studied the laws and traditions around kippot. I talked regularly with my clergy, who were all available, by the way, about the meaning of wearing a kippah. And I decided, after all that wearing a kippah each day did not bring me closer to my fulfillment of my spiritual journey. I know that is a much longer answer than the questioner surely expected, but how beautiful would it be if that's what one meant when they said, I'm really reform? Do you go to Shabbat services regularly? Yes, because it adds such beauty to my week. Yes, because it's a time to focus on my relationship with God. Or yes, to see my friends and community. Or yes, because that's what my ancestors have done for generations. Or no, because it doesn't do much for me. Or I like to do it from home on Zoom. Or no, because I get my spiritual uplifting from doing social justice when I volunteer at Monday meals. Every one of those responses, yes, no, everything in between, is really reform. I grew up in what I would consider a really reform household. I often would characterize it as deeply religious, not deeply observant. Every Friday night, we were at temple for Shabbat services. Eventually, as a teen, I negotiated with my parents to get a Shabbat pass. This was once a month I got to not go to temple and do other teenage things. But otherwise, the expectation was that we were going to services. But completely non-negotiable was Friday night Shabbat dinner. On that dinner table was probably both a non-kosher brisket and cheesy potatoes. I even think there might have been pork chops on the table every once in a while. My father swears that we wouldn't have had pork for Shabbat dinner, but we definitely had other nights of the week. And post services is the best part. It was always a trip to Larry's Ice Cream, still wearing our suits. When in rabbinical school, I decided it was time to figure out what it would mean for me to be really reform around food, around keeping kosher. For a year, I kept a fully kosher kitchen. I learned much more about kashrut throughout the centuries, and after that year of introspection, decided that this traditional style of keeping kosher just wasn't for me. It wasn't bringing me spiritual elevation. Luckily, this was also when I met Mayan, my now inspiring wife. Well, she was always inspiring, but she's now my wife, I guess. Together, we decided that the animal, or how the animal was butchered, wasn't what was meaningful to us, but rather, for us, it was how the animal was raised, how the land was cared for, and that the employees were treated with dignity and paid a living wage. We are still very, very much on this journey of getting our own kashrut right, but it means regular 30-minute trips up to Evanston to a butcher we trust, or regularly paying a bit extra at a farmer's market. Now, you know, I'm still a little nervous standing up here on the bima on Yom Kippur, speaking as a rabbi, admitting that he eats pork. But I am very proud of how my family has made its decisions about being really reform. The biggest stumbling block with this ideal is that the onus is on us. We're responsible for our own individual thoughtful choices. In a world where individualism is so prized, this should be easy, but it might not be. It means trying new Jewish experiences. It means continually learning, gaining new knowledge, and with new life experiences, continually re-evaluating our Judaism. At this moment, I don't start each day by reciting the Shema, but maybe at some point I will. In your Temple Sholem community, we're here to partner with you, to help you on your journey, Whether it's welcoming you with open arms at Shabbat, or kibitzing together as we do acts of social justice, or learning together through a myriad of adult educational opportunities, maybe just a one-on-one with your clergy. Temple Sholem is here for you and your journey. So what aspects, big ones or small ones, of your Judaism would you like to give a really reform answer to? Your journey might be different in 5782 than it was last year, or than it will be, say, in 5790. But this is why we're part of Reform Judaism. It's not reformed, it's reform, because we continually change. We're continually reforming our Judaism to be centered around us. Like those many Jewish designers who are at the core of mid-century modern, we must design our Judaism thoughtfully and with meaning. We must evaluate how it fits in with our day-to-day. We should study how others have used their Judaism. And taking that furniture metaphor further, we need to see how it fits into our space. Does it complement the other pieces in our lives? I hope that we take the time to design our Judaism thoughtfully, with wisdom and understanding, and with grace, and with our community. May these meaningful decisions bring us a greater sense of spiritual wholeness in this year of 5782 and in the years to come. Gemar Chatima Tova, may it be written in the book of life.